video that we just watched, and good afternoon. My name is Fabiola C, and I will be discussing, and the video that we just watched, it was presented by UNESCO, or the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, and it presented the variety of values that sports it can present for people, and overall, and this is very universal. And this also applies for many sports, and especially with football, by promoting values such as teamwork, unity, fraternity, and this can be presented in various ways, such as like skinship, forms of affection through like hugging, which is sometimes very, it's not usual amongst like male peers because of the masculinity which they are pressured into portraying. And so this leads us into a research question of, to what extent does football impact the mental health and behavior of its football athletes? So the thesis question would be that football impacts its athletes through the coach's influences on their behavior, sexism, through the masculine vices and virtues, and the mental health of the athletes. So first and foremost, a way that they are affected is through symmetrical communication, or just overall effective communication. Coaches, as we know, have a deep impact on their athletes because of their constant interaction with their athletes to achieve a common goal, such as like winning a tournament, and so like they have a really deep connection. And so for this to be really effective, they need effective communication or symmetrical communication. And when this is accomplished, the athletes portray higher levels of satisfaction in the group, and decreased burnout, and higher levels of commitment. This ensures that the players won't be tempted to drop the sport, and will continue to persevere alongside with their coach and their teammates. And so furthermore, this is also related to the psychological need of autonomous motivation, which is the way that the athletes will feel like they have a feeling of accomplishment, and which is very intrinsic at its core. And so here on this diagram, we can see this correlation which was presented by a study of the Academic Journal of Sport and Exercise Psychology. So here we can see the correlation between an autonomy support coach and autonomy support teammates, and how this will directly lead to the satisfaction of the three components of satisfaction for autonomous motivation to be fulfilled, which is autonomy, relatedness, and competence satisfaction. And so with the fulfillment of all of these, which is done through autonomy, coaches, and teammates in that environment, that will lead to pro-social teammates and pro-social opponents as well. So just an overall very positive environment filled with teamwork, support, and just overall very pro-social. And here we can see what happens when these are not met. And so with there's a CC coach, which stands for controlling coach overall. When these coaches and teammates are not supporting the autonomy of an athlete, the three levels of autonomy aren't satisfied, which leads to a very antisocial environment, and whenever we see here with the autonomy, the flip side of it would be for the athletes to replace that mindset with ego enhancement, fame, and in search of extrinsic rewards, which would be just like overall like praise and maybe just like a higher level of status. Okay, so furthermore, furthermore, it is no secret to us that football is a very male-dominated space, in which a lot of masculine virtues and vices present themselves. And so in here, you can see that when the athletes are in a situation. Okay, so masculine vices include things such as like wanting to feel power over women, and this can be seen in like individuals across the human race in all places. And whenever a human being feels powerless, that will drive them to look for power in another space which they will feel competent in and feel control over. This can be seen in sexual assault victims, in which they feel powerless and therefore they look for other victims who they see as less powerful than them, so that they can regain that feeling of safety in a sense, and also that feeling of power. So here on the diagram of the left, which was presented by the Journal of Sex Roles, here we can see that identification with football was possibly correlated with higher levels of sexual prejudice and sexism. And this goes for both genders. As we can see for the women's side, we can see that there was a definite difference in the identification with football and identification with men's figure skating. We're here with 4.16 and 1.75, which is way higher than like the rates for the identification with men's figure skating, which is, as we know, very, very different from football, as it has no components of aggressiveness, and it's not rooted a lot in like masculinity. And in the stimulus source by Roosevelt to his letter to his son, and there he explains that he really values sports that promote masculinity, they're very manly, as he said. And so yeah, whereas in men's figure skating isn't in that environment, it's very non-aggressive, as we know. So that's why the Journal of Sex Roles believes that may have been a component role in the higher levels of sexual prejudice. So you can see, and here on the diagram to the right, and also similarly to the way that coaches impact their athletes through their behavior, through antisocial and pro-social environments, it can also affect their sexual prejudice and improve that. So here this was an experiment set by the Journal of Interpersonal Violence, in which they explored how coaches could impact the way that it could impact the sexual prejudice and just overall reduce the amount of bystanders in that group. And overall here in this side, we can see that those that have positive intervention, and this, which basically means that more of the teammates felt more compelled to speak up and not be a bystander whenever they saw moments in which their teammates were being unfair or just like displayed sexism towards okay, so furthermore, here we can okay. So some people might argue that football has a really good effects on their athletes because of because of the overall positive effects that physical exercise and sports have on the mood and anxiety of athletes and just overall people. So like here we can see that thing over there that says CRH. That is a cortisoid, which is the one that gives that feeling of stress to people. And so whenever that CRH is increased, that means that their stress is higher, which will ultimately lead towards more depression. On the other side, we can see that with physical exercises, stress goes down and the cortisol decreases, which then decreases their likeliness of getting depression. Okay. However, through the Academic Journal of Brain Injury, it was presented that athletes were getting that in the last 95 years, there was an increase in the famous football players who completed suicides, and most of those were the ones who had who went through more life-stressing events and also a risk of brain injury through CTE. And this is the brain without CTE, and this is the brain after the fully developed CTE. And so it's very important to also consider the athletic identity. And so it was presented by an academic journal, which was very similar, and it presented that those football players who retired, who were forced into retirement because of brain injury or because of injuries overall, those that had athletic identity were more at risk of depression and anxiety. So solutions for this include enforcing the idea to coaches to set up coaching philosophies, which would make sure that the coaches have in mind the well-being of their athletes, and also their behavior towards other people, so that they don't behave antisocially or towards women or even just like their teammates, is to promote a very positive sports environment. And for these coaches to do this as well, they would have to maintain a balance between between rewards and also just like punishments, because through effective communication, and that's the way that the athletes will feel more compelled to perform better. And so and to also engage in, so they will have to also implement ways to improve the mental health of their athletes, and just talk about anti-violence and anti-aggressiveness. Also, to as a solution for the risk of injury and depression for the famous football athletes, it would be very wise for people to develop better safety measures for athletes, even such things as helmets. And so limitations may include that risk of injury, that football, it gives antidepressant qualities, and that there is no guarantee that all coaches will follow anti-sexual violence plans. These are my sources. And thank you. Do you have any questions?
First question. How valid and reliable were the sources that you used, and how do you know?
I got most of my sources from peer-reviewed academic journals, and when I look more into the sources, especially for example, with my sexism perspective, I got that from an academic journal which focused on sports psychology, and even the researchers were more focused on feminism. Like, they wrote all of that from a feminist perspective.
If you had more time, what additional research would you conduct on this issue?
I would probably have done more research about the mental health aspect of like how they are affected, and maybe even done more research on how parenting can affect the athletes, and even just like and even for like sports and stuff like that.